Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Lighthouse sessions. I'm excited. I have my new friend, Nate Littlewood, with me today. Nate, why don't you tell the audience a little bit about who you are and what you do?
Yeah, thanks for having me, Jeff. It's great to be here. So my name's Nate. I am a fractional CFO, which basically means that I work across a number of different businesses. I essentially help founders of startup companies make sense of their financial statements. I coach them and work with them and help them see their financials as a strategic ally that can help them make decisions about business strategy, growth, how to become more profitable. And at the end of the day, basically help them achieve their financial business goals.
I love it. So, what kind of startups, what kind of founders should be reaching out to you? How would they describe themselves?
Yeah, so I work exclusively with e-commerce and consumer products founders. And what these people all have in common is that they're in the business of manufacturing, distributing, and selling physical goods, right? So that means if we've got inventory, they're all thinking about cost of goods sold, they're thinking about how to finance that inventory and get the inventory delivered to a customer as efficiently as possible. I work across a few different product categories. Most of my customers happen to be in kind of furniture, household goods, durable type products, or they're food focused. In terms of the sales channels, I spend a lot of time with businesses and founders who are selling on platforms like Shopify and Amazon. But some of my clients have got pretty strong wholesale businesses as well, right? They sell to distributors or supermarkets and that sort of stuff. In terms of the customer profile, the people that usually look for someone like me are a founder of a 2 to 8 person company. They're doing 7 figures of revenue. And the problem that they have encountered, Jeff, is that they've started to notice that there's a poor correlation between the time and effort that they're investing in their business and the financial outcomes that they're seeing or achieving. And that could materialize in a few different ways. It could be that they're not paying themselves enough. That could be that they're paying themselves, but not very consistently, because there's other parts of the business that are getting prioritized from a cash flow perspective. Or maybe they're doing all this work, running around and working longer hours than ever, but there's never any money in the bank. And they're like, WTF, like, where's all my profit and cash flow gone? I don't understand this math and why I'm generating so little. So that's usually the problem that gets people interested and looking for someone like me. And then I have obviously a whole process and flow that I take them through beyond that to help them, set goals, figure out what the source of the problem is, figure out where the profit or cash flow leakage is, and basically plug those holes. And so we can, get more of the cash and profit in their bank and in their pockets.
I love that. And I used to say WTF is where's the funds?
That works too, I guess.
Because I think, if I can relate this, for the record, I think most entrepreneurs have these moments in these conversations and, not unique to the consumer goods space, but usually they're lying awake at night thinking, how the hell am I going to make payroll? Or they're telling their wife for the third time, yeah, the money's coming, just wait.
Yeah.
And honestly, I think one of the challenges I see is that the traditional accounting world has failed businesses by trying to make everything they do seem mysterious and mythical. A lot of founders don't get to know their numbers because their accountant said, don't worry, we got it. So what would you say to those founders who are like, my accountant said he's got it?
Yeah. Interesting. Well, I think that it is a mistake for a business owner or founder to completely outsource this topic to someone else and say, hey, the accountant or other guy said he's got it. At the end of the day, businesses exist to generate a profit. And I'm not trying to say that as a nasty, capitalist Wall Street guy. Like, that is the reality of why companies exist. Like, it's part of their charter is to generate a profit. If that's not part of the goal, then there's plenty of other ways that people can organize around a common mission or activity, right?
Yeah.
You could have a club, you could have a nonprofit, you could have a charity, you could have an expensive hobby, right? But if you're a company, then part of your mission is to generate, economic value in the form of profit, right? When it comes to the relationship with finances, I see 4 common phases that founders and business owners move through. The first is what I call the denial phase. And this is very common for people who, claim to have an allergy to numbers. They'll just say, look, I don't know. I don't want to know. I don't understand this finance number thing. Like, make this problem go away for me. The problem with that approach or mentality is that whether or not you're engaging with the numbers and looking at them, they're continuing to exist, like with or without you, right? And they're going to be there.
It's kind of like gravity. You can believe in it or not, but it's there, right?
But it's still there. Exactly. The numbers are still there. And, sometimes people who are at the denial phase, they kind of justify it, or, it comes about, I should say, due to a concept called cognitive dissonance, which essentially means it can be really hard for us humans to hold 2 conflicting narratives at the same time, right? You can't believe that you're a good person, but also shoplift, for example, right? When you apply this concept to business owners, it's like, I want to believe that I have a good company, that I'm a good business owner. I want to tell my family and friends that I'm an entrepreneur. I've got this good business. But if at the same time, the financial statements are saying, you kind of suck right now. Like, what you're doing isn't working. You're not making money from this. Like, the business is looking pretty lousy, right? That's a completely different narrative of the same thing. And a lot of business owners and founders find that an uncomfortable, thing to address. And so that's a big part of why we get into, this distancing ourselves or, denial of the finances. The next phase is when we get into curiosity, and we start. Sorry, the next phase is usually overwhelm. Curiosity comes next. In the overwhelm phase, what happens is we've had a go at looking at the finances and we've attempted to understand, but there's too much going on. It's too confusing. It's like, oh my God, I tried like too hard. And that often happens if you do this without the right type of support and someone helping you out, right? Because it's a lot to take on. I mean, it took me years to understand this stuff. And unfortunately, people who experience overwhelm often go back to the denial phase, square one. The third step is curiosity or intrigue. And what happens here is we start to kind of peer over the fence and go, I don't really understand all this stuff yet, but it looks like there could be something interesting there, right? And we're at least have an open mind. We don't really, have a good comprehension of what's there, but it seems like there could be something useful. The fourth and final step where I'm trying to take people to is what I call in the enlightenment phase. At the enlightenment phase, it's like, aha, the penny drops. And, you finally start to see patterns and trends. And you start to recognize these financial statements as a strategic ally that can actually support clearer decision-making. They can give you more confidence in your decision-making as well. And if used skillfully and tactfully and carefully, they can actually make your life a lot easier as a business owner, because they make it very, very clear the things that you should be prioritizing and focusing on. And they can also make it very, very clear the things that you should not be wasting time on and not focusing on. So, a huge part of what I do is trying to coach and manage people through this transition and help them realize that their financial statements and using finance as a tool to manage a business actually can make their life a lot easier in a lot of ways.
I love that. And I think, a lot of people live in that denial state. And for the record, I have a background in accounting, so you and I could talk about the numbers in detail. However, we won't because most listeners, they're so stuck in their pain, they can't comprehend understanding. So what are your top 3 things you wish every business owner knew about their numbers? And it can be top 5, I don't care, but what are the things you focus on to give them that confidence that I got this? Because I think that's the piece that gets them out of the denial and into curiosity.
Yeah, so I think one of the most important things we need to, I guess, incorporate when it comes to improving this relationship with financials is we need, often need some help on focus and understanding like which of the parts of these financial statements or numbers should we actually be paying attention to. I mean, in 2026, there's very few business owners and founders who are dealing with data deprivation. There's not many entrepreneurs going, hey, I don't have enough data and information and stats and things to look at, right? Like nonsense. No one has that problem in 2026. We all have the opposite problem, which is there's too much noise, there's too much information, and there's too many things to look at. And a big part of what I do with my clients is helping people figure out which are the important numbers, because you do not have the mental bandwidth and brain power and, frankly, the emotional energy to tackle everything, right? You're just going to kill yourself if you try to do that. So that'd be number one. Number two is that you need to have a solution to what I call the context vacuum. What I mean by that is you need to have some way to understand whether certain metrics and ratios, for example, your cost of goods sold as a percentage of revenue, you need to know what is good, bad, or ugly for your industry, right? If I told you that for some businesses, it's, have a client where it's like, say, 45%, for some businesses and business models, that would be a fantastic outcome.
Yeah.
For others, it's terrible. And if you don't know or have a way to kind of compare and benchmark yourself to peers and the industry around you, then you really have no way to judge whether a lot of these numbers are good or bad. And unfortunately, a lot of founders are so busy, they're so head down focusing on, busy work and doing what they need to do in their business, that they really don't get a lot of time or opportunities to do this benchmarking and getting the context that they need. Unfortunately, the byproduct of that is that we tend to misallocate time, attention, and resources. If you don't know where the biggest problems are in your business, then there's a good chance that you're misallocating your scarce resources, whether it's capital, people, or other things, that you're misallocating them to projects and priorities that don't really make sense. So the way that I see this materialize in my work is I'll get on, a financial audit or a review call with a potential client, and they'll come along and they'll tell me about this product they're launching or the marketing campaign or this TikTok shop they want to do or whatever. I'm like, whoa. Like your cost of goods sold is 20% higher than your peers, right? There's no amount of fancy marketing campaigns that can fix that for you. If we do not fix your cost of goods sold relative to revenue, you do not have a business here. So screw the TikTok shop, screw this marketing campaign. Let's focus on this thing because we need to, fix that before anything else works in the business. So, that's I guess a prime example, and something I actually saw pretty recently in a founder audit I did.
I love that. And not to pick on accountants, but I once worked with an accountant. I'm not kidding. They were charging $30 an hour for their staff, and they were paying them $50. And they wanted me to help them with marketing. And I went, do you want to look at your margins here?
Wow.
And again, it was somebody who had inherited the business. They didn't mean to become, self-employed, but they wanted to be known as a generous employer. So they kept raising rates, but they were also generous because their poor clients couldn't afford the rates. You're losing $20 an hour for every hour you're busy. Why would you ask me to help you grow? And I got fired on the spot because apparently accountants don't want to know that they don't know their numbers.
Yeah, that must have been a rather awkward conversation, I imagine.
Well, the funny thing is, I was dancing around it because I assumed they knew. And
Yeah.
when I'm like, wait a minute, you don't actually know what your profit margin is, and they're like, no, what's that? I'm like, oh my God, where'd you go to school? Sorry. But what I'm bringing out is I'm not picking on accountants. I love accountants. We need them. But the
Yeah.
problem is a lot of times they're so busy focusing on year end and tax returns.
Mm.
I would say a lot of accountants I know, their entire use of bookkeeping is to file the tax return.
Hmm.
And I'm
Yes.
like, and?
Yes. Yep.
And,
Yep.
and honestly, that's why people like you need to exist, because you're not just filing the tax return saying, here's your balance. You're diving into the numbers and saying, is anybody else concerned by this? And one of the things I'm going to guess you look at is profit per product as well, because I've
Hmm.
seen products, like you said, that if they're not profitable, no amount of marketing is going to save that.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah, and just to clarify one point here, like I actually don't do any bookkeeping and accounting. I obviously see the value and importance of it, but from my perspective, bookkeepers and accountants play an incredibly important role, but their job is to categorize and explain the past.
Yeah.
That's my starting point, but everything that I focus on is really looking into the future. And so when a founder comes to me, as they often do, with 20 or 30 different ideas and priorities and, growth concoctions that they've come up with, like my job is to take all of that information, put it into models, build projections, and help them make decisions about where they should go in the future. So, kind of help steer the ship, if you will.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, your point about costs is spot on. As and I would say the same about a lot of marketing, initiatives and sales channels, right? Like it's one thing to look at the high level business numbers, but when you start getting into product specific analysis, when you get into, marketing channel or, customer acquisition methods or sales channel specific analysis, that's when you can, really uncover some interesting stuff in terms of what is or is not working. And a lot of founders like to go on intuition and gut feel, and that's usually okay if your margins and profitability is ridiculously good, right? If your profit margins are whatever 50, 60, 70%, then fine. By all means, like trust your gut and instinct. But businesses like that are rare in e-commerce and consumer products. Most people have much tighter margins than that. And when you're getting down to, like single digit percent margins at the bottom of the income statement, it's really hard to make decisions about that stuff just based on, gut feel.
Yeah.
And, you need the numbers, you need to have, crunched the financials in order to know what does or does not make sense.
Now, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but I will say I used to work with accountants who'd say, oh, it's just bookkeeping. And I hate the word just, because if you don't have good bookkeeping, you're not going to have good compliance. But more importantly, your vision of the future. I've seen some where they muddy the ratios, the margins.
Hmm.
Without that, you as a trained expert in this field could not make a solid prediction. There's
Hmm.
zero chance a business owner is going to figure it out if the bookkeeping's bad.
Correct. Yeah, absolutely.
So I
Absolutely.
want to point out that to me, bookkeeping is the root of everything. And if it's done
Mhm.
badly, God help you, because everything's going to be fuzzy. But
Yep.
it's amazing when the books are solid. Bringing in someone like you, you're going to see patterns that nobody thinks
Mm.
of. And as you said, we don't have a lack of information. It's knowing what to look at and what to monitor. So for those watching, what are the top things you would recommend they're watching in their business, daily, weekly, or monthly, or how frequently? But what are the
Mm.
things they should always be asking themselves?
Hmm. Yeah. So I guess it's it's an interesting question, and there's so many ways I could answer it, which is why I'm pausing for a minute to think about it. I'm gonna focus on the clients and businesses that I know best, and I
Yeah.
think a lot of what I'm about to say will apply more broadly to other businesses, but I just want to kind of caveat that this is coming from the place of the industry that I work in, which is e-commerce and consumer products. So number one, you need to understand unit economics, right? You need to understand how much you get paid for every order or every customer, how much it costs you to acquire that customer, how much it costs you to deliver a product to that customer. That gets you down to what we call the contribution margin. And then it's also really helpful to look at all of your indirects and overhead costs like labor and rent and office space or whatever. Really helpful to look at that in the context of like a per customer or per order value as well. When it comes to the financial statements, the way that I encourage people to think about them is your profit and loss is really the North Star statement. And I like to use an analogy of I'm a coach and you're a performance athlete, right? You're training for the Olympics. What the profit and loss statement is going to do is it's going to provide a time series or a narrative of how the business is kind of improving over time. We spoke earlier about the goal of businesses being to generate a profit. Well, the goal of capitalism is that profit increases and grows over time, right? If anyone's put money into a business, if they've invested in the business and they want a return on that investment, then the company or business needs to have a goal of actually increasing its profitability over time. That's how you make the investment worth more. So the profit and loss is what tells us that. The cash flow statement has varying levels of importance depending on the type of business that we have. For like a consulting or like an accounting firm, I would imagine that the cash flow statement is not hugely important because the cash flow statement is going to look a lot like the profit and loss. In my industry, where people are investing in physical goods, inventory, right? They might have a huge purchase order for $500,000 one month, but then the next 2 months, they don't need to buy any inventory because they still have it in stock. What you have is these situations where the cash outlay for physical product is very high in 1 month, but then it's 0, 0, 0. We see similar patterns in the revenue line from seasonality, for example, right? Black Friday, Christmas holidays usually peaks in revenue, but other times of the year it can be a lot lower. And so when you have a lot of variability in the revenue and the cost line, then the cash flow statement becomes incredibly important. It's also very, very important for bootstrap businesses where cash is scarce and you need to manage the capital that you have very carefully. And businesses that are in a distressed scenario. One of my clients actually at the moment is in this category, struggling to pay their bills, has a lot of people that they owe money to. And we've developed a 13-week cash flow model where literally 100+ vendors and suppliers are mapped out line by line. So we can see at the individual supplier level who's getting paid how much and in which week. And we use a tool like that to basically manage cash, which is it's the oxygen, it's the lifeblood of an organization. A business can exist for a period without profit. A business cannot exist for a period without cash. No cash means no payroll. No suppliers. Eventually, people are going to stop, showing up to work.
Yep.
So, they're I guess the beginning of it. If we wanted to go on, we could start talking about the balance sheet, but it's probably more detail than we need for this conversation, I suspect.
Well, and honestly, I think all of the financial statements, well and good, but the reality that you're pointing out is it's the actual timing and the flow of cash. I've seen profitable businesses. The worst one I saw, $16 million in profit, and they went bankrupt because they couldn't collect their receivables, but they had payables that were due and secured and things like that. So cash flow is everything. Yeah,
that's terrible. Wow.
And it's I've seen a lot of those horror stories where they're profitable, and they're paying, they've got tax bills and they're looking at it. But in the oil industry, this is a weird fluke, but the big oil companies will come to you and say, we're going to pay you net 365. You can't negotiate.
Really?
Yep.
Wow.
And they'll
That
do it
is
after
insane.
services rendered.
Huh.
So
My Lord, I've never heard of those sort of payment terms. That's crazy.
The oil patch is a unique beast because when the price of oil drops, spending stops.
Yeah.
You know, and unfortunately, the big companies, they fund their lulls by free financing from their vendors, which is usually small companies. So again,
Wow.
I hope most people don't encounter those. But they will say, if you want to do business with us, you will accept these terms. And many people think profit before anything, and they don't recognize the bills still have to get paid, even though the cash isn't coming.
Yeah. Wow, that's intense. I mean, when I see like 60 or 90-day terms with my clients, I think, wow, that's pretty bad. But P65 is a whole nother ballgame. My goodness.
And the worst part was most of them arbitrarily negotiated net 30, and then they reached out and said, no, we're switching to net 365.
Wow.
And by the way, here's our law firm. If you want to fight it, go ahead.
Wow.
So big companies like to step on small, and that bugs me. But I think it's just helping people understand that cash flow is the only thing that matters. If you're in business, yes, you have to make a profit. However, until that profit is in the bank, you haven't accomplished the goals of a business yet, right?
Correct. Yep. It's just it's all theory until it actually lands in the bank.
I hate it when people bring me spreadsheets and say, look, 3 years from now, I'm going to make this much money. No. How are you going to survive? You've got this dip for 3 years, and then you're going to make money in 3 years. No.
Yeah.
Now let's talk about what it's like to work with you, because I think you're pretty personable. I know most people are afraid of finance people because, oh my God, what if I feel dumb? But I'm going to guess that your background in banking and finance has made this so that you're quite comfortable speaking English. Is that fair?
I would like to think so. I guess I should also add about my background that yes, you're right. I was in banking and finance, but I also spent 6 or 7 years running my own e-commerce business as the CEO and co-founder. So, and we were a bootstrap company, by the way. So never had millions of dollars in the bank from investors or anything. So I know what it's like to be stressed about how you're going to make payroll. I've had to scramble around at the last minute figuring out how to, finance a purchase order and, negotiate with MCA or revenue-based lenders. So having lived that and having, that been my world for a number of years, I have a pretty good perspective and understanding of what it's like to be a founder and running one of these businesses. In addition to that, I was also lead mentor for an accelerator program based here in New York called Food Future Co. We basically specialized in getting food, bev, and ag tech founders ready for their first round of institutional investment. And to be totally frank with you, it was actually that experience, like working with all of these other founders through the accelerator program, that got me interested in doing what I'm doing now, which is basically financial coaching for founders. So yeah, I guess my career and background is roughly half in high finance, Wall Street, investment bank, and that's obviously where I learned numbers. But then the last 10 years or so has been in the startup world. And getting pretty deep in the e-com and CPG space.
I love it. Now I'm going to ask a hard question because I want people listening to understand this. I'm going to guess that you're not the first person they're bringing in, but when should a founder at least be talking to you as a fractional CFO? What's the stage they're at that they're ready or should be ready or need you, I guess, is the key.
Yeah. Great question. Let me start off by talking about when they shouldn't bring me in.
I love
So number one reason you should not waste money on someone like me is if you don't have your bookkeeping and accounting in order, right? Garbage in, garbage out. If we don't have clean books, good numbers to work with, there's no amount of CFOing that can fix that. Number two, and this is a bit more industry specific, I guess, would be you should be post product market fit, which means that you should have gotten to the stage where customers want your product, you're scaling revenue, you have somewhat scalable and repeatable ways to acquire customers, and you're within reach of profitability, or if not already there, right? If you haven't reached product market fit, and we don't yet know if people actually want your product or service, there is no amount of financing that can fix a bad product. So get the product right, make sure you can sell it to people. And until you've done that, like every dollar and cent of your budget and time and attention should be focused on figuring out product market fit. Once you've got that, then it might be time to talk to someone like me. And I say might because even then it's not necessarily clear that you would need someone like me. Let me explain one of the frameworks I use. So as a business owner, I like to describe the role as a little bit like an investment manager, right? Your job is to source capital and invest capital. You source capital from investors, from lenders, from accounts receivable. You might also source capital that you could take it out of inventory, right? A great place to source capital is from customers, from sales, right? But these are all places that you can get money from.
Yeah.
Then you have a varying number of options in terms of where to invest that capital money. You could invest it in people. You could invest it in Facebook ads. You could invest it in inventory. You could invest it in opening up new sales channels, right? And I think the number of options you have on each of these scales, like as it increases, the value of a CFO increases. If there's more choices about where money comes from and more choices or decisions to be made about where you invest that money, then a CFO becomes more and more valuable. Some businesses, and in fact, I've spoke to a founder last year who was doing 8 figures, amazing business, going really, really well. But I ended up saying to him, listen, I don't really think you need me. I don't think you need help from a finance guy. And the reason is because his sources of capital were very, very simple and clear, right? He was getting profitable sales from his customers, right? So it was very clear where his next dollar was going to come from. And it was also very clear what he was going to do with that dollar once he earned it. He was going to reinvest it in inventory and ads. They're really the only 2 things he was doing with his money. And this formula was working for him. And I was like, just keep doing what you're doing. Like, it's working really well. There's clearly a big market here. People love the product. You had a very, very simple product catalog. I think he only had 2 SKUs. So it's not like he even had, product development needs or anything like that. And I was upfront with him and said, listen, I'm not really sure you need me. Like, you've got a formula here that's working. It's clear the decisions that you need to be making here and what you should do. So just go and do more of what you're doing. So yeah, I guess to summarize, you should have good bookkeeping and accounting. You should be post-product market fit. And I think CFOs add a lot more value when there's a large number of choices in terms of where your capital is coming from and what you can potentially invest it in.
I love that clarity, because I think a lot of people think, oh, I've reached a certain stage, I need a CFO. But as you said, if they're simple, if you're a single SKU business and you know what your ads do, and you don't need guidance. You can just rinse, repeat, and ride off into the sunset. But when you're herding cats, that's when somebody like you has to come in and say, okay, let's point this cat this direction.
Yep. Exactly. So yeah, when there's more and more of these cats, I call them shiny objects or priorities or opportunities.
Squirrels, whatever.
I actually take all those cats and shiny objects and I put them in a Notion board and I help my founders organize them. And we've, commonly got a list of 20 or 30 of these different, shiny objects and or ideas. And what we do periodically is we run them through screening filters. So we're looking at things like return on investment. What is this idea potentially worth in terms of earnings or profitability? And what is it going to cost us to do in terms of time, capital, or both? So we can look at ROI. We can look at these ideas in terms of a bottleneck analysis. Like, you're all familiar with the bottleneck is, but in a business context, for an e-commerce business, you would apply it by looking at the flow of traffic or the flow of website businesses through your store. So you start with traffic, then you've got a page view, then you've got an add to cart, then you've got a checkout, then you've got an average order value, and then you've got, maybe repeat business that comes after that. And so there's kind of this flow. And what we can do is benchmark every step of that funnel, determine where the bottleneck is. And if an idea addresses that bottleneck, then it should be prioritized. If you've got a 0.5% conversion rate and your peers have all got 2, then removing that bottleneck would 4x your revenue. And so we need to be focused on that. The final framework I use is really about skills alignment. And this is super important, particularly for small businesses, because you do not have an Amazon.com type talent pool to pull from, right? You do not have hundreds of thousands or millions of people at your company. There is not an expert at absolutely everything within your org chart, right? Yeah. If you're running a team of 2 to 10 people, then the reality is that you actually have a fairly small skill set, set of skills and talents to pull from. And so it doesn't make sense to take on projects that are not aligned with the skills and capabilities of your team. Yeah. That would be like me putting a 30-pound bowling ball in front of you and saying, hey, kick it in the goal 200 yards away. You're just going to break your toe and you're not going to get the ball in the goal. It's like a waste of everyone's time. So part of what I try to do with my founders is figure out, what are the balls that you can actually kick into the goal and put them in front of you. And so, it gets into a little bit of HR, type stuff, understanding what the people and their teams are good at. But you need to understand what's going to have a financial impact. You need to understand what's going to remove a bottleneck in the business. And you need to understand what are the priority types of projects and tasks that this founder or this team can actually do and do well. And once you have all those things, in my experience, you usually go from 30 shiny objects to 2 or 3. And at that point, it's very clear what we should be focusing on.
It's funny because one of the things I deal with a lot of founders is picking which shiny objects to focus on. And for what it's worth, a lot of the visionary founders, they succeed because they're chasing the next shiny object. And honestly, if we knew which shiny object was going to be the big thing, we'd pursue that. But sometimes with visionaries, they're juggling a whole bunch. And I think what's often missing is the math to decide which ones to juggle and which ones we need to set aside politely and which ones we need to throw away with anger and disgust. Because again, to most founders, and I'm working to remove the emotion, these little shiny objects are precious to us. They're our little babies and we want to nurture them. But, if you have 500 babies, you can't put them all through college.
No.
And some of them weren't meant to go.
That's true. That's very true. I love that analogy, Jeff. And one thing I'd add to that has come as a result of me spending a good amount of time reflecting on my own journey as a founder of one of these businesses is first 2 or 3 years of my entrepreneurial journey as an e-com founder. Honestly, I was like a kid in a candy store when it came to shiny objects. And everyone's got a friend who works in a marketing agency or, this cool ad they saw on Instagram that they want to show you for a product that's just like yours. And, there's an infinite number of these ideas and things that you could chase. And one of the great, but also one of the absolutely terrible things about founders and entrepreneurs is that we love learning. And I recognize this in myself as like, I don't know the first freaking thing about how to run a Facebook ad, but you know what? Figuring it out is really fun. And so is figuring out how to manufacture a product. And so is figuring out how to set up a Shopify store. And, you know, I was just keeping busy with all of these fun, interesting learning projects for like 2 or 3 years before I, you know, eventually realized the need and benefit of focus. And years later, with the benefit of hindsight, I actually think I had a dopamine addiction.
Yep.
I was just getting such a hit and such a rush. It made me feel so good to be learning about all of these, you know, cool new projects and technologies and things that, you know, I was just living off the dopamine rush for years. And, you know, it took a lot of self-restraint to control that. But when you do, and you can, you know, get dehooked from that dopamine rush and figure out how to get your dopamine from deeper work and more concentration and more focus, like, things totally change.
Well, it's fascinating that you bring it up, because I actually have a friend, Dr. Doug Brackman. He does research on dopamine receptors, dopamine deficiency. And one thing that he's found time and time again is that entrepreneurs have a different reward system.
Huh.
So our brains, literally, we're addicted to dopamine and we pursue it. And the problem is, the normal population, you know, the Joe factory worker who goes and works the line for 30 years, their dopamine hit comes from a day finished. Our dopamine comes from a new idea started. So
Wow.
we're literally hardwired to self-sabotage, because we will chase those shiny objects, are addictive, and we will chase them at the risk of all else. And by the way, that was my aha moment. I used to think Gino Wickman was being cruel to the visionaries. However, I now understand he's a visionary, and what he recognized is we need those integrators to take our ideas to the finish line.
Absolutely, yeah. Yep.
So it's a fascinating field. Now, I could talk to you about this all day because it is near and dear to my heart. But I would say what I like about the work you're doing, and not to undersell it, I think you are literally saving entrepreneurs from themselves. You can give them the numbers so that their gut can calm down and they know what to focus on. So I appreciate the work you're doing for founders.
Yeah, no, I like the way you put it. And yeah, I appreciate the feedback. Thank you.
Now, final question. This is the easy one. Where can people go to connect with you and learn more about what it's like to work with Nate?
Absolutely. So 2 spots. Firstly, the website, which is futurereadycfo.com. As far as social media, I'm most active on LinkedIn. My name is Nate Littlewood. I'm posting there pretty much every day, so I'm pretty easy to find. Yeah, you'll find video content, thought leadership stuff there, which is really all, I guess, geared towards challenging people to think a little bit differently about their numbers and finances, and, you know, building an argument for, you know, approaching the financial world from a different angle, I guess.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for taking the time to hang out with me today, Nate.
Appreciate it. Thank you for having me, Jeff. I've really enjoyed the conversation.